We're gonna do some bases. I hate basing, so let's get through this as quickly as possible. Now, I'm not joking when I say I hate basing. When I started playing Warhammer, it was all sand and flock, and both of those suck. But in this ever-expanding world of miniature painting, now we have a whole range of products at our disposals to basically, get in, get out, get up to base ready, and just get those 10 points. Because yes, basing is part of tabletop standard. In this video, I'm going to be mostly using the Army Painter Fanatic Effects range, as well as a couple of speed paints for some OSL glow, and, just regular paints. Everything we do in this one is going to be pretty standard. Starting from a black primer, we're going to start dry brushing on some heavy metal from the Army Painter. And with what's covering next, you don't really have to worry about coverage here. The patchiness actually kind of helps. Dark Rust is going to be the first effects paint we use here, so we may as well go ahead and just kind of bundle them all together. These rust effects dry super matte and they have a bit of grit to them, which is how it looks like rust. So the best way I've found to kind of deposit those pigments and extra grit is just by stippling it on fairly heavily. Then with a damp brush, you're going to go along and feather everything out. Trust me, it may look fairly rough here, but when this dries, everything is going to go super matte, which means we're going to take a lot of the shine away from that metallic paint, and you're going to spread the grit out, which is going to give us a texture all around. And we're going to do exactly the same with Grim Rust. And we're going to treat this a lot like layering. Every time we move up in color, we're going to cover even less of what we did on the previous layer. What we're doing now is adding tonal variance and creating visual interest, and we're going to do the same thing with the whole damp brush situation and feather it out. You can already start to see from the first round of feathering out that effects paint that everything has been toned down and kind of muted out. It looks a bit dusty. And now for the last one, Fresh Rust. And we're going to do the exact same thing all over again. It's really hard for our brain to create randomness, so just pick out a few spots that you like it in, and then feathering it all out is going to help it blend it back. And now for something that's not a rust effect, verdigris. And if you were thinking, finally, something different, a new technique that I can soak in, you were wrong. Because we're going to treat it just like the rust effects, except in a different spot. Now we're looking for crevices and details around, where water would settle. And we're going to do the same thing. We're going to dab it in just that little bit, a little extra heavy, and then come back in with a damp brush and really spread it out. That little bit of moisture is going to change the viscosity of the paint and start to thin it out so it runs into all the recesses. Now it's something different. We got some True Blood. Now there's a lot of people that like to just load up some kind of brush or toothbrush and just flick this stuff everywhere. I'm generally not one of them. Instead, I like to use it to paint some kind of picture, so I generally like to have one big puddle and then kind of create drip marks, to set a scene that somebody's had a bad time. And we're going to do the same with oozing vomit. The key to these effects is having a strong blob at the end of the brush and just dabbing it. We want puddles. Speaking of puddles, disgusting slime. And the same thing kind of goes here. You could absolutely just slop it on, or you could create all that dotted dripping effect that we did with the vomit and the blood. Instead, I want to actually make it look like there was a bit of a leak. It's come out of a canister, so we're just going to slide it all the way down, nice and thick. The cool part about all of these effects paints and the techniques that we're using is you can take all the paints and the techniques and apply them to other things like vehicles, terrain, and maybe even some of your other models. Let's do that synthwave wet dream. But first, here's the secret to dry brushing. And that secret is not actually using a dry brush. I put a little bit of water on my hand and then just let it soak into the bristles. Now when I say a little bit of water, I do mean a little bit. We're not saturating the bristles, we just want a little extra moisture to help the paint flow off the bristles. And now when we go into our dry brushing technique, it doesn't come out chalky. This is the dry brushing equivalent of thinning your paints. Now you might have guessed it with this one, but we're going with some kind of synthwave OSL. After laying down that Diabolic Plum, I'm coming back in with Royal Blue, and this is really when we're going to start to push the glowing effect. Exactly the same as the layering ideas, we're covering less of the previous layer. Except this time, the brightest colors are going to go towards the center, because that's the only trick with OSL. And now with 5 parts ballpoint stabilizer and 2 parts matte white paint, I'm going to create a mixture that's essentially a panel liner. And I'm going to absolutely flood these recesses. If you're worried about the dots and the overspill, if you're quick, you can just wipe them off with your finger or with the second damp brush. And while we're at it, I may as well take out the middle of these vents as well. Now you may have guessed it, but all the white here is going to act as our light source. So for the middle of the vents, I'm coming in pretty strong with Familiar Pink Speed Paint. It doesn't look like I'm adding a lot here, but to start with, I'm just making sure I've got everything covered, and then I'm going to come back in with a pretty heavy drop in between. And while that's all still wet, I'm going to grab some white paint and just start making a dirty swirl in the middle of each.
Think of it kind of like really, really wet painting. And then with some thin down Caribbean Ocean, we're going to do those lines. You can go a little bit stronger if you want, but me personally, I just want a slight tint. The brighter it is, the more it's actually going to feel like a light source. Which is also why we put those little white dots in all the pink vents. And now that we've done Grimdark and Synthwave, we can try something else.
If you think we've earned it, hit a like and subscribe, and if you want to take another step in supporting the channel and, you know, making sure I don't miss a meal, you can jump into the Patreon. There'll be links in the description.
And that something else is basically just combining the two. Personally, this is probably my favorite one because it actually feels like an Underhive rave. So we're going to pull out all of the tricks that we've just learned in the last two bases and put it all on this one. From the dry brushing to the rust effects where we start to feather them out, to layering rust effects just like their normal paint and not extra gritty weird stuff. And then all the way up to, you know, our brand new secret dry brush technique. That isn't really a secret. Moistening the bristles on a dry brush has been around for a really long time, but I find it's like a lot of other tips that if you don't know, you don't know. And sometimes all it takes is one weird hairy Australian to let you in on it. And I know I've already mentioned it in the video earlier on, but these techniques and effects paints are stuff that you can really use on just about anything. If you want to grime up your vehicles or terrain or add a little bit of extra easy OSL glow, this is basically all we've done. Yes, we did it on something as insignificant as a base, but you know, these are transferable skills. And it really doesn't stop there. You can start to integrate your models into these bases by adding these same effects. Feather out some rust paint across the feet so they look like they've been walking through it, add some blood drops, or even dry brush up the legs so it looks like the glow from the light source keeps going. And after a quick rim job, we're all done. And to be completely honest, these don't take any time at all. It may be 5 minutes for each base, and that's really it. You don't have to spend hours and hours on something for it to look good. Don't get me wrong, you absolutely can, but you don't have to. As always, a massive thank you to InGames, The Army Painter, our awesome Patreons, and of course, you. Big love, you filthy animals.